Well, good morning, everyone. This is the Cerberus Radio Network, and we are live. This is June 28th, 2019. And if I'm not mistaken, it's a Friday. You probably were expecting to hear our good friend Greg Junk Bond Carpenter open up the show again, but again, he is still in Paris, roughing it, and today, Suzanne is going to be out of the studio as well. So you're stuck with me and our good friend Justin. Not Amash. I know some of you were hoping it was Justin Amash, but it's Justin Spears with us today. And we have a good show. We're going to talk about a number of different things. You can get us always. You can find us on Facebook. On Facebook, you can always find our links. We always share them for every show. And the very first post is a pin. It's pinned there. It's the very first post you'll come to every time you come to our Facebook page, and all our links are always there. Radio Co, YouTube, everything's there, and you can find us that easily. It's not that hard to find our links. And you can listen to us on YouTube. If you listen on YouTube, you can join the live chat. I will be getting in there in just a few moments. I am opening the show, so I couldn't get in right away. And you can listen to us, as I said, on radio.co. And there's something 24 hours a day there. There's a loop that plays each day. There's shows. There's old shows from here. And then when there's live shows, obviously, there's a bunch of you listening to double digits today. I'm very impressed. Thank you, everyone on Radio Co, because that is where I wish everyone would go to listen, because I think YouTube is going to go away if they continue to make this so difficult. That's why we were late this morning. Everything is just a mess. Hangouts and Google and YouTube are creating massive headaches. I think they do this on purpose. I think they're trying to force all of us off the air so that the only message you'll ever get is the neocon and the liberal Marxist on their channels. So you can also find all our shows on SoundCloud. We have well over 200 shows on SoundCloud. And on YouTube, there's well over 300 shows going back to near the beginning of this network. So you can find us. You just got to do a little looking. Look for Cerberus Radio Network, and we're around somewhere. So at this time, I'm going to send it over to Justin so I can check everything out, make sure we actually are broadcasting this morning. So good morning, Justin. Take it away for a little bit while I get everything checked out.
All right. Well, good morning, Cerberus Radio Network land. To everyone listening out there, I appreciate the opportunity to be back with you again today. I was on earlier this week, and I'm just humbled that Suzanne would reach out to me and asked me to co-host again this morning, which I, again, was more than welcome to do. I'm fresh off of doing a show this morning myself. As I mentioned earlier this week, I used to run a podcast called The Other Side with a coworker. For those of you, again, who are not familiar with me, I am a high school teacher in the state of Indiana. I teach social studies in central Indiana, and have dedicated the last probably about year or so of my life to trying to provide a perspective that shows just how rotten, I guess, is the only word that I can use to describe it, the public education system is. And you might go, whoa, wait a second, you just said you're a teacher. Yeah, that's right. I am bringing firsthand experience of what I am hearing and seeing and witnessing in our schools, and writing about it. And we're writing a book that documents and chronicles the history and failure of school, and really ultimately why reform is futile, why throwing more money at the public education system is a waste of time and resources. And so we're working on a book, my coworker and I, he teaches right next door to me, to kind of lay that out. We are writing for FEE at fee.org, the Foundation for Economic Education. You can catch some of our writings over there. If you just search by my name, Justin Spears, you will find our articles over there. I also have had a couple of articles published through the 10th Amendment Center, and I appreciate Mike Meharry and Michael Bolden over there. Great people. I've talked Mike up before. Meharry is just a wonderful individual, and I appreciate the support that he shows. And again, ultimately, Susan Suzanne, Jeff, and everyone over here at Cerberus Radio Network for allowing me the opportunity to be with you today. Now, I want to go ahead and jump right into our content, our first topic this morning. And again, this is something that I was not available yesterday to be on the show, but I listened to the show while I was out running around. I had to take my kids to a couple of appointments and swim lessons and things of that nature. And I was listening to Jeff and Suzanne. And I know Suzanne's been talking a lot about education. She's had me on a couple of times before. And the last time she had me on her show, the Wasatch Report, we talked a little bit about alternatives to public schooling. And one of the things in particular that we had talked about was this idea of unschooling. And you might hear that and it may resonate with you a little bit, or you may go, well, what are you talking about, unschooling? Well, one of the first things that we want to talk about when we attack and look at and analyze the public school system is, first and foremost, we have to come to the conclusion and recognize that it is a compulsory nature, that you're forced into having to have your children placed in school. Most states have compulsory laws, if not all of them now, have some sort of compulsory laws that require you to send your children to some form of schooling. Okay, now, here in the state of Indiana, we are actually fairly fortunate in terms of alternatives that we have to the traditional public school system. For example, homeschooling is a very popular option here in the state of Indiana. Charter schools, while under fire and a lot of criticism, again, another option. There is a K-12 group. There's Indiana Connections Academy, which is online virtual schooling. There's a myriad of choices, which is good that we're moving along that, as I talked about earlier this week, that progression of line of where on one end you have compulsory public schooling, and on the other end, you're going to have what I'm going to talk to you about, which is unschooling. And so along that continuum and that line, you have variants of what schooling looks like. Now, you've probably heard me use this word before if you've heard me on here or you've read any of my other stuff, where I am intentionally saying schooling and I'm avoiding the E word, education, because ultimately what we get in schools is not education. All right. And I know that might seem like a nuanced thing, a semantics thing, but it's important. Words and vocabulary when you talk about these things are very important. Okay. We want to talk about education and not schooling. We want to talk about learners and not students, because once you use that language, right, then you can define the narrative of how you go about approaching this. So essentially what unschooling does, and I mentioned this before as well, I would direct everyone to read John Holt, to read John Taylor Gatto, to read modern day thinkers like Kerry McDonald, Peter Gray. These are individuals that are really trying to get the citizens of this country, parents that have children, that want to see them educated, that want to see their kids equipped with the skills and the tools that are needed to compete and thrive in this economy that we have and that we're forming. And so I've recently read Kerry McDonald, who is the Senior Fellow of Education at FEE, recently published a book called Unschooling. And I read through that book, and this was really my first foray into really, truly understanding what this concept of unschooling is all about. And I know I probably can't do it justice. I spoke with Carrie. She unfortunately is at a convention out in Portland, Oregon this week, where she couldn't come on with us today. She said, "Don't let that stop you, though." So I'm not going to. She could probably do it much better justice than I could. But basically, what unschooling does is, first and foremost, it is a process. Okay, I think that's important to understand. When I talk to people about unschooling and I tell them it is basically a system where you don't really have a curriculum. You don't force the learner into having to learn math in a particular way, or having to learn science or what have you in a given way, the way that the school system would have you believe, or even some homeschoolers. I'm a member of Indiana homeschool groups here on Facebook, and it's unbelievable the amount of times that I see parents reaching out to say, what curriculum should I use with my, fill in the blank, 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old. And my immediate thought is, you shouldn't use a curriculum. You should allow that child to naturally explore what his or her interests are. And you will find that when you do that, you allow a natural curiosity to flourish and develop. Now, when I say that unschooling is a process, the reason that I say that is because if you have a student or a child, I should say, who's been in the school system, that system has zapped them of that natural curiosity and love of learning because they've been conditioned to have to do the worksheets, to have to move on from point A to point B and just drop whatever it is that they're learning at a particular time because now it's time to move on to the next activity. They have been told that they have to sit crisscross applesauce, put bubbles in their mouth, only speak when spoken to, or raise your hand. You have to ask for permission to move about the room or to even be able to go to the bathroom. And so all of these different systemic things that schooling has done has absolutely zapped the love of learning out of our children. And so when I say that unschooling is a process, right, depending on how long your child has been a part of the schooling system, that process may take longer or it may be shorter. Whenever you open up the opportunity for kids to be able to learn and explore what they love, it may take them time to understand and realize what that looks like. Okay, so that's the first thing that I would say. Because when I talk to people about this, they kind of turn their head a little bit and say, you just let the child do what they want. And Carrie talks a lot about this in her book. This is not a license to be able to do whatever you want. Of course, as the parent, or if you're a part of a self-directed learning center, which of course there are many out there, you guide them. That's what you're there to do. You know, in teaching, we always say there's this popular saying that I want to be the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. I want to be there to help encourage and help guide and push you in the direction and the passion that you want to pursue. But that doesn't mean, as so often is the case, when I talk to people about unschooling, that if you were to say the child is no longer going to have to be forced into a classroom, into a desk, and have worksheets and textbooks and curriculum crammed down their throat, that if you remove that, they're just going to sit around twiddling their thumbs, right? The default, and I've heard this firsthand from people in public education. Oh, we have to have schooling because otherwise students would sit on their social media accounts all day. Students would be at home playing video games all day, or people would just stop learning. Like all of a sudden, if you remove government forcing students to have to go to school from the equation, that all of a sudden everybody becomes dumb and people just stop transmitting information and knowledge. And that's such a simple-minded thought process with this. That is absolutely untrue. Now, as Carrie says, and other proponents of unschooling say, that may indeed be the case for a short period of time. In the short run, when you pull the carpet out from under someone and you say, now you have freedom, now you have choice. Now, if you have an interest, as my 11-year-old son does, in video games, and you want to learn the math and the science and the computer programming and all of those different things about video games, let's explore that. Let's go through that together. And again, that's going to be a fairly difficult concept for them to be able to grasp. And that's why it's so important for you as the adult to play the role of guiding them. And that can seem overwhelming and daunting. I understand that. And I don't think that there's any perfect way about going about doing this, right? I think that as you do this, you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. We learn when we make mistakes. We need to model that for our children, and we need to show them that as we're doing this, we're not perfect. But so oftentimes is the case in schools, the teacher has to be perfect. You have to be on all the time. You can't not have an answer to something. You can't not handle a situation the right way. You're under the microscope. And then we turn around and we say to kids that we don't want them to fail. Well, when they don't fail, they're not growing. When we constantly push kids through the system, as I've talked about before, I have a piece written about this over at fee.org, where I talk about the real scandal in education isn't the college admissions scandal. It's what are the lack of skills that our kids are graduating our high schools with. Because I can tell you firsthand that there are kids who are pushed through the system. There are kids that are, because of graduation rates and having such a huge part of the funding for schools, are just shoved through in what are called credit recovery classes, where they are sat in front of a computer and they do the curriculum digitally. And there's all kinds of data from the Department of Education that shows how little a student gets in doing that. But what it does is it creates that little check mark that you can put in the box that, yes, this student took government. Yes, this student took economics and now they are ready to graduate, even though they have very little government or civic skill, even though they have very little economic skill that they can take with them as they move on into the next phase of their life. So that's a lot to unpack. I understand that. I would suggest that you start by looking up resources. The Alliance for Self-Directed Education is a fantastic place to start. There's lots of great communities on that website that you can check into and learn a little bit more about what is the concept of self-directed education. How is it applicable to me as a parent? This is the great thing about self-directed learning centers, is that oftentimes parents say, I can't homeschool because mom has to work and dad has to work. We have to have two income earners in the house. And so, what am I to do with the children? I mean, let's just be honest, right? There are probably a number of parents out there in communities across America that see schools as glorified babysitting so that they can be off working their career. Look, they're offering to take your child at an even earlier age now. Here in the area that I live in the school district actually that I teach in, our superintendent was out touting the fact that we now offer a pre-K program, so that now at ages 3 and 4, they can get your child into the school system and start to mold them and shape them and prepare them, because they have to be able to hit these standards at kindergarten. And that kind of sets the tone for the rest of elementary and so on through the system. And so now they are out advocating that they take the child, and for parents to say, now I don't have to find a babysitter. I can send them to the school, right? Schools offer after school services where they will babysit your child after 3 or 4 p.m. so that you can stay at the job and continue to work. Summer programs as well. Okay. So there's a lot of different ways in which the school and the school system is working to replace the family unit. All right. And I know that can oftentimes be something that can be a little bit of a challenge to those who are thinking about alternatives. The great thing about a self-directed learning center is that you no longer have to worry about being at home and finding a way to be able to help educate your child without having them in the public school system. So I just want to kind of close by saying that, again, I always think about that continuum, that line, okay, of where you've got public education on one end and you've got unschooling on the other end, self-directed education, as you might call it. And so anything that pushes you down that line is better than the alternative. Okay. Charter schools are better than public schools. Homeschooling, I think, is even better. Unschooling would be, in my opinion, even the best option out there, knowing that nothing is perfect. Okay. But anything that you can do to remove yourself from that environment. Because as I hope to be able to explain in my book and show firsthand through accounts that I've witnessed in my 10 plus years in education, that this system is beyond just letting us down in terms of educating. It's damaging our human capital, right? And I know sometimes we can take criticism because we look at it that way, and we'll say, well, it's a person. Yes, I get that. It's human capital. It's what's shaping and going to mold the future of this country. And I know Suzanne has talked about this before, and I've echoed it when I've been on before too. When you look at the rise in numbers of ADHD diagnosis, autism diagnosis, and the drugs, who's making these claims? I've told the story before that my son has been targeted and looked at as being identified as ADHD from kindergarten up through 5th grade. He's a normal functioning child, a boy. He needs to be out learning through kinesthetic ways, not crammed into a classroom and told to sit in his desk and be quiet and complete the worksheet and just do as you're told, right? That is one of the most ridiculous things that you can say to somebody: just do what you're told, because that absolutely crushes the will and the spirit of that person there. So again, beyond just letting us down in terms of educating and preparing for the future, when these kids leave high school for the last time and they go on into college, colleges are saying in spades, these kids are not prepared. They don't know how to do basic things. Suzanne's talked about that before. When they enter into the job market, right? They don't have the basic skills that they need to be successful in the job market. We've got businesses here in Indiana that are paying adults bonuses for simply showing up to work. Just to show up. If you show up on your schedule as you're scheduled for a certain period of time, you will receive a bonus for that. That's how bad it has gotten. They're no longer drug testing construction workers in certain parts of the state because they have such a shortage of skilled workers that they're just taking warm bodies at this point. That ought to be an alarm bell going off in everybody's mind. But again, most damaging is the psychic nature or the psychologic nature of this, that people are being drugged just to simply get along, be quiet, and conform. And so that's why I believe, and passionately, if you can't tell, that homeschooling is better. Unschooling is best. Try to get your children to embrace what they love and teach them in that way. And that I hope will kind of prompt you to learn a little bit more. If you have questions about any of that, as I said, I'm certainly not an expert. There are all kinds of resources out there, but you can certainly reach out to me. I'm on Facebook at Justin Spears 4. You can find all of my stuff again on Fee. You can find it on the 10th Amendment Center, and we continue to put more and more out there. And you can look for my book. We're hoping to have that wrapped up by the end of the summer and maybe ready for publishing by the end of 2019 or early 2020. So with that, Jeff, I want to transition into.
I want to chime in on this as while we're here,
Sure.
so that we'll keep this discussion going for just a moment longer. But first, I want to get to our chat room. And Andrew, our good friend, says, I hire statisticians. I would never consider hiring a statistician trained under Common Core. I would refer them to my competitor. They will get the right answer, but without, I'm not sure if this is the right word, Andrew, but velocity, my customers require. I'm not sure if it's veracity or if it was supposed to be velocity. I know how spell check does, or autofill does to me. It always puts in words that I don't intend to write. So, but at any rate, yes, with Common Core, we have this one size fits all education. Now to what I was going to speak on about this. Most people out there are going to say, but we need government to have education. If we don't have government, we're not going to educate our kids. You have just fallen for plank 10, pillar 10, whichever you want to call it, of the Communist Manifesto, government education. You are doing exactly what Marx wants you to do. Give your child over to the government. As you said, Justin, this is how they're destroying the family. So when you look at the 43 goals, this was from like 1970s of communism, one of them is to destroy the family unit. And how they're going to do that? They're doing it through the schools. Now, do we need government to educate? Probably not. Look at our framers and founders. Most of them, they were educated in their homes. They didn't have a curriculum, but they were educated. And they went to, after they were educated at home, the vast majority of those founders and framers went to some sort of university, whether it was in England or here in the States or in France. They went to universities. I know, I'm trying to think of his name, went to France to a university. But it escapes me at the moment. But the vast majority of them could read Latin, read Greek. So they would read the antiquities in the original languages. Can most of our kids do that today? I'm thinking no, they don't. So did the government have to educate them? No. It was a function of the family. The family took responsibility for their children. Now, Suzanne and I talked about this yesterday a little bit, and I, again, do not want to sound harsh or cruel, or I don't know. You pick the word. It's a matter of priorities. What are your priorities? Are you going to put your treasure in your children, or are you going to put treasure into your McMansion or that new Escalade? So I really going to come down to a choice. What is your priority? That career or your children? I don't want to be mean about it, but really is. What's more important to you? making lots of money or making sure those kids get an education that will make them ready to live life. So that was my thoughts on that, Justin. Maybe you want to expound on them or tell me I'm wrong, or go ahead.
No, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that Mike Margison, who's my coworker or cohort, he's working with me on the book, and he's co-written articles. And they said we used to hold our own show, The Other Side, which you can find in the archives on the Cerberus Radio Network. That look, he's got young children. I have young children. They only get one shot at this. Right there's no reset button. There's no undoing the harm of what happens as they're forced through the system. So, to kind of go along with what you were saying about where are you going to put your time and attention and resources and effort into, you absolutely owe it to not only yourself, but to your children to really examine and explore. And I think a lot of parents typically default to this idea that, well, I'm a product of the government system of education. I turned out fine, so my son, my daughter will turn out fine. But that's so short-sighted and so I guess maybe arrogant to say that. It's just a cop out when you know that there may be issues, and when you know that there may be something that would better serve them. You owe it to yourself and to them to do that. And so, yeah, absolutely, I agree with you 100% on that there. So.
So, Justin, you're a few years younger than I am, and you're a few years younger than. Never mind, I won't mention her name. um, I'm a product of public school, but I went to public school at a time that was completely different than it is now. I mean, I started in the public school system in the mid to late '60s and graduated in '80. But that was completely different. 30 years, 34, 39 years later, things are completely different with our public schools than they were even when I went. The level of education has changed drastically. I've seen the worksheets that are brought home and tried to help with them. Some of them are absolutely ridiculous, and it's impossible to answer what they want. They're just ridiculous worksheets. I mean, I sat there and I actually wrote a note on it when it went back to the school. I said, "This is ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense, and it's not. You cannot solve it the way you want it to be done." And
yeah, that's right.
That's the way it is.
Yeah, and I would say that most people that are in that kind of mind frame of, well, I'm a product of the system and I'm okay. You're okay in spite of being a product of the system, not because of it. And so, again, you can find all kinds of examples of people who have, and again, Carrie does this in her book, where this is one of the things I really liked about the book was she doesn't just feed you a perspective on what unschooling is and tell you that, or try to shame you into to trying it or doing it. She provides you with example after example after example of people who were in the system, people who had children, who just finally had enough, and whatever that tipping point or pressure point was, they decided that they were going to go out on their own and create some type of, and there's a variety of them out there. Look, guys, that's the other thing about this. There is no one size fits all solution like what the public school system tries to push on you. Right now, they'll try to tell you that there's all these different programs and yada yada yada, but essentially it's one size fits all. Unschooling provides you with a myriad of different ways. There is no one right way to go about unschooling a child. It is really using the individuality, which is probably the most important unit in our society, is the individual, and molding to that as opposed to molding the child to the curriculum. So I just want to make that point as well. I think that's important for people to consider as they may think a little bit more about the options of unschooling, what it might mean.
Yeah, and there's one last thought I had just thought that you kind of sparked. I've turned out pretty well because I actually spent the time after school, after graduation, actually reading a lot of these things. And I learned the truth because I went to school, public school. I was indoctrinated with the USA. The US government is the best thing in the world. There's nothing better. It's it's the be all end all, and we're the greatest. And I found out that, you know what, we are, we have some good things here, but we're not the policemen of the world. We're not. We shouldn't be putting our troops everywhere, fighting wars all over the place, because we're trying to force our will on other people. And there was an article. Well, we can go to this later, but the fact of the matter is, I turned out the way I did because I read the Anti-Federalists. I read different books on economics. So I learned some things after the fact because I learned the truth, not what I was indoctrinated coming through the public school system.
Yeah, it's a great point, and that's something I tell people about myself. Look, I have a master's degree in education from Indiana University. I have a bachelor's degree in marketing from Butler University. Um, in both instances, right? I mean, I'm not disparaging my alma mater. I'm just simply saying that the content that I learned in those at those institutions, I used very little to nothing in terms of content. It was simply a checkbox that potential employers could look at and say, oh, okay, you spent 4 years, you spent 2 years doing this. You must have the desire and will. A lot of what knowledge base I have, as you just said, came from after I graduated, where I started picking up textbooks and reading Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams and Thomas Woods and just all of these great thinkers. And just once you read one, it's contagious because, as you said, it's the truth, right? And it's just so enthralling to go out and just continue to eat it up and learn more. And so, that's ultimately, I think, going back to what you talked about at the beginning of the show, why we do this show, why we put the writing in that we put it into these organizations, and why we host these shows is we're trying to encourage people to think. We're not necessarily trying to tell you what to think. We think there is a truth out there. We think that what we have caught on to is the best way to think about how to organize society. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to encourage you to think. And that's what I want to happen out of, telling you a little bit about unschooling. I'm not here trying to preach to you so much as I am trying to encourage you to explore this option and learn a little bit more about it and see if it's a fit for you and your family. It may not be. There may be something that works better for you, and if so, that's great. But ultimately, that taking ownership and control is really what's most important there. So yeah, that's great points that you make there, Jeff. Let's talk a little bit about these Democratic debates from the last two nights. Jeff, did you happen to be able to been fortunate enough to not have eaten prior to watching these, so that in the instance that you got physically sick, you didn't have much to clean up? Because I tried to watch, and whew, boy, my blood pressure shot up a little bit here. What were your thoughts here on the two-night Democratic debate?
Well, Justin, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I did not partake. Well, I mean, I can read. I read the articles afterwards about what all they proposed, and I could have sat down without watching and told you exactly what they wanted. They want single payer. They want higher taxes. They want more control of our lives. Now, some of them are anti-war, but once they get there, they'll be just as much war as everyone else, just like Trump was. Trump preached that he was non-interventionist, and then as soon as he got there, we're still in the wars. They're talking about more wars. So,
But
but no, I didn't partake.
Jeff, it's all free. Remember?
Yeah,
Everything's free. Free
yeah.
healthcare, free education. It's like the old Oprah show. You get a car and you get a car. And it's mind numbing to listen to professional, quote unquote, professional adults, people that have reached this stage in their life where they're looked at as potential leaders of this country, to be up there so economically illiterate. I mean, I know it's easy to create the memes and troll and go after, Bernie Sanders and Biden and all that. And I find some humor in that. I think it's good. But the reality is, it is sad. It is really sad to listen to people stand on a stage in front of the nation and espouse the things that they do, and probably even more terrifying to know that there are millions of people that are out clapping their hands, shaking their heads, pumping their fists, and saying, this is what we need. Because ultimately, what any of those people on that stage last night would propose I mean, look, we're already eyeball deep in debt. There's just, and that's bipartisan, right? As you said, it's not there's no one party that owns that. It's Republicans and Democrats alike that have gotten us to the position where we are in. But if you are to seriously consider the idea of single payer, if you're seriously considering the idea of taking on the increased funding in education, both K-12 and post-secondary that these people are offering, along with other social programs, immigration reform, it's absolutely going to be the death of this country as we know it. And I don't mean that to be hyperbole. Okay. I don't mean that to be like these guys like Hannity gets on and, oh, this is the most important election of our lifetime. If we don't get a Republican, a guy with an R in office next to his name, this country's going to fall apart. I don't mean it in that regard. I just mean fundamentally, belief-wise, the foundation of freedom and economic freedom and choice and liberty, they're already just barely flickering. Right? What is the tagline that Suzanne says? We're fighting for freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. Right? We're working to protect that. It's flickering right now, and I just have a fear that a Sanders presidency, a Biden presidency, a Harris presidency, on down the line would absolutely extinguish that flame, and it would be very difficult to be able to recover from what these guys are proposing.
Well, this is CRN. We defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. So I got our call sign in there. Anyway, yes, here's the deal with this whole thing. And like I said, I didn't watch the debates. I watched the summaries afterwards, and it was all pretty much predictable. They are all in favor of more government spending, more government debt, more government control. So we have Sanders that wants, it's not just Sanders. They all want Medicare for all. And I saw one news report. They were saying that it would cost about $68 trillion over a number of years to do this Medicare for all. And quite honestly, it's not feasible. We're $22 trillion in debt. And I think I don't know if I said the right number. I should have said $68 trillion to do this. We're already $22 trillion in debt. We have unfunded liabilities, which is Medicare and Social Security. So now we're just going to add to that unfunded liability. We are quickly headed towards an economic disaster. Saw an article about Russia, China, India, and somebody else having a big meeting. I think you'll see a big move away from the dollar. Once these other countries start abandoning the dollar, our economy is in a seriously bad spot. So there's some dangerous things here. There's an article from the Los Angeles Times. Let me get the headline here. I have it down so I can't see it. Federal debt on track to reach unsustainable level in 30 years, CBO reports. I think that's awfully generous. I think it's way less than 30 years. The federal debt already equals 78% of the nation's gross domestic product, and it is on track to reach 92% in the next decade, 144% by 2049, according to calculations compiled by the Congressional Budget Office. So, like I said, all these things were very predictable. I expected to hear this whole stuff with free healthcare, free education, free housing, free everything, and none of it's free. It all costs something, and somebody's got to pay. And I'm afraid they're going to try to make it into debt, and eventually this debt is going to come to the point where it's unsustainable, and there's going to be economic consequences. And Justin, I don't know if you saw that thing the other day about Sanders wanting to just wipe out all college debt, all college loans, and the $1.6 trillion, just wipe it out. Did you see that article or see that in the news?
I did, yes.
And did you take an economics in college? Is there any rules and things about in economics? I mean, is it just something that you can just wing it and do whatever you want and there's no consequences?
No, yeah, absolutely. There are consequences to doing that. And again, I know I said earlier, it's kind of fun to poke, fun at what these guys are doing. And I took a little swipe on the Facebook page. I said, hey, look, while we're at it, why don't we just go ahead and get rid of all car notes and mortgages? Because, it's not fair that I had to buy a $24,000 car and a $200,000 home, and every person needs transportation and housing, and gosh, I got to pay a lot of interest on this thing. So if you're familiar with the Marvel comics, I said, why doesn't Bernie just snap his fingers like Thanos and just everything goes away, right? And then it's
Yeah.
all unicorns and rainbows and butterflies. Of course not, right? Of course, there's going to be fundamental economic consequences to doing that. Okay, let alone the signal that it would send to people in terms of just being, hey, you can be irresponsible. I said on our Mike and I did a bonus episode this morning that I'll have out later today on this issue, and I was talking a little bit about the fact that I have a tremendous amount of student debt right now. And when I look at our debt portfolio, our house and is number one. Number two is student loans. So there's no way around understanding how important this is. But the most important aspect of this is I made the choice. I made the decision to go back to school. I made the free, no one put a gun to my head and said, you have to take that money. I knew when I went back to school to study education that it was going to cost me a lot, to the point where I had to take out signature loans from Sallie Mae to be able to cover the cost of tuition. So I'm sympathetic to it. I understand it. Yes, it would be great if that were somehow wiped off the books for me. But that is not what I want, because that ultimately sends a very, very dangerous and bad signal. It sets a horrible precedent. And Jeff, this is what I kind of wanted to wrap up this and talking about, because I ultimately didn't watch all that much of the debates either. I watched about 45 minutes of night two, and that was about enough for me. I, like you, read some of the recap and saw some highlight clips. Here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't matter. Again, Republicans, Democrats, whatever. Right now, we're focused on the Democrats. They're going to try to hit you in the gut with emotion, not with logic. Every single one of these issues, whether it doesn't matter, healthcare, education, transportation, immigration, go on right on down the line. It does not matter. For the Democrats in particular, they will come out and say, if you don't agree with us, you are a bad person. If you agree with us, then you've got a loving heart. You're kind. You're cloaked in love and support. And they want to hit you in the feels with those emotions. They want to disregard logic. You could even see this in the way that Bernie Sanders answered his very first question out of the gate last night, was on his tax plan for, will taxes be raised on the middle class? And of course, he launches into some diatribe about what all government needs to do. Again, the question is asked, but is this going to raise tax rates on the middle class? Again, he deflects. Finally, for the third time, the moderator says, can you just answer the simple question? And eventually he got around to wheezing his way around and saying, yes, but it's going to be offset by da 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 da. Right. So the facts and the logic are buried deep, deep, deep down, if they're ever even brought up to begin with. And what they want to hit you with is emotion. They want you to feel empathy and sorrow and angst and agony and all of these other emotional feelings for the various different situations. Look at how they're shaping the narrative of immigration. They're not talking about the crime statistics or the burden that it's putting on individual cities where these floods of immigrants are coming into. What are they talking about? Separating children. They're talking about the human toll that it takes on families and how we need to be open and tolerant and equality and all of these other things. But again, there's all consequences to that. You got to pay the piper at some point. And that's ultimately what they never get around to doing. They never want to talk about that. And that, again, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, is why our shows and our side is so important because we're trying to probe you into thinking about things logically. So that was my big takeaway from the debates.
Yeah, and I just want to just kind of expand a little bit on what you kind of hinted at. The fact of the matter is, it makes no difference whether we end up with a Republican or Democrat in the White House, because, quite honestly, we were told we have to have Trump or everything's. I mean, it's the most important election of our lifetime, like you said about Hannity before. And we hear that every time. They're going to be saying that. You'll be hearing that for the next year and a half. It's the most important election of our lifetime. The fact of the matter is, Trump may be a speed bump in the Marxist superhighway, but that's about it. Whether we have Trump or one of these Democrats there, the same policies are going to be in force. We were told by Trump when he was campaigning, he's going to be a non-interventionist. He's going to get us out of all these places. He's going to get us out of all these wars. Well, are we out of all these wars? No. And in fact, he's expanded them. And now there's push from Bolton and Pompeo, or whatever his name is, Pompeo, that wants to get us into a war with Iran. We were told that he was pro-life. He's going to do away with funding for Planned Parenthood. Did the Republicans, when they had both House and Senate and the presidency, do away with Planned Parenthood funding? No, it's fully funded, and probably, truth be known, it probably was expanded. They were going to cut spending. Well, did they cut any spending? No. The debts have grown at an even greater rate than they were when we had the worst president of all time, Obama. Does it matter who's in the White House? No. One of the people on Facebook put he's looking for the day he can wake up and not care who's in the White House. I told him I don't care now because it really makes a difference. They're two sides of the same Marxist coin. One is just a little slower than the other, but we end up in the same spot. When we keep putting our faith and hope in trying to fix Washington, D.C., we're going to get more of the same. That's why I keep pushing for minarchism or volunteerism, somewhere in that realm where we become much smaller. We have 3,142 counties in this continental landmass. I think we'd be good with 3,142 small little republics governing themselves, and we could do a whole lot better with our self-governance if we had no legislatures and no executive branches, just some minimal laws, a judicial system with the only to enforce the laws that the couple laws that there are on the books, and to mediate disputes between citizens. And I think we'd be much better off. So I gave a solution. I didn't just bash our system. I gave a solution.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback off of that in the last couple of minutes that we've got here as we start to wrap up. And I think I've talked about this before in some interviews. I think Suzanne and I may have even mentioned this, or I might have talked about it earlier this week. And I want to expound upon that because I think it is easy sometimes for us to get into the mindset of just always being on the attack against what's out there and not coming up with solutions, right? Last night, I got into a Facebook exchange with a public education teacher, somebody that I used to work with's husband. They're both educators. And she had posted a topic on Facebook about an issue that we're having here in Indiana related to a couple of parochial high schools, Catholic high schools that have they've determined or found out that there are gay teachers in the building, and one fired, one said no. We're going to allow the teacher to stay. The archdiocese said, okay, we're going to pull support in the one, but we'll continue to support the other that made the decision to fire. And of course, that set off all kinds of, you can imagine, firestorms, mostly about separation of church and state, which was what this initial post was on. And it was geared toward the idea that, look, there are state taxpayer dollars that are going to these institutions. And I said, not so fast. What is going to those institutions are voucher dollars. So it's the citizen that is choosing to take taxpayer dollars and use them in that direction. And I said that's a very key point, right? That's different than them, directly getting allocated tax dollars from the General Assembly. And so that set off a whole chain of conversation that I had related to vouchers and other forms of public service that I think would fall under the idea of allowing choice for the individual and not being told what you have to do. And of course, it doesn't take much imagination to know that this could extend into police and protection services, fire services, transportation, so on and so forth. That if you were to just allow people the opportunity to choose what they wanted to do with the money that they spend on taxes, that we would get much more competition in the market. And most importantly, to kind of come back to what you were talking about there, the decision would be being made at a local level. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, there's not much more valuable or important in all of this model of society than the individual, right? So when you give an individual choice in what they do with their money and their resources, that's ultimately what we want. And that goes back to the concept that I had brought up before of a subsidiarity. The subsidiarity model says that you do not make a decision about anything above any of a local level that could make the decision therefore. So in other words, if you've got a question about transportation and it can be settled at the county level, then you let the county deal with it. You don't go to the federal level or the state level even. If you've got something that can be settled at the state level, you don't go to DC to do it. But our way of thinking and our mindset is completely opposite, right? We are in a situation where we'll have something come up and we'll immediately go to DC without even stopping to think about, well, who has the authority or who should we go to help solve this dispute? And I think oftentimes what you'd find is if you did that, if you went through that exercise and just said, okay, who should be handling this, you'll get a much more efficient answer and you'll get a better outcome in the long run. So I want to really encourage people, if you're not familiar with the subsidiarity model, it's something that's really embraced in the Catholic Church, but it can be used in normal society as well, to say that if you've got an issue, go to the lowest level of government, the most local level of government that you can to solve a problem, and that will give you the best results and outcome, right? And so I think that that's an important thing to look at here in terms of solutions and pushing back. It's very, very easy to say I am a tiny little speck in the whatever 330 million people in this country, and how can I be an agent of change against Washington, D.C.? Well, the answer is you can't. You're not going to. You're never going to be able to push back. I mean, look, Trump campaigned on Drain the Swamp, and he hasn't even come close to even finding the plug to pull. So you can't go about it that way. You're setting yourself up for failure. But what you can do is you can say, what in my local area that I live in, my community, my neighborhood, my township, my school district, whatever unit of government you want to look at and talk about, what can I do to be an agent of change? That's what you should be doing. Okay. And so I think that's really important in terms of solutions. Jeff, I wanted to wrap up here.
I want to jump in here.
Yeah,
I need
go
to jump in here. You said some words that I made this challenge yesterday. I'm still waiting. I still had that $5 bill in my wallet that I will send to the first person that can cut and paste the article and section or the amendment that says there's a separation of church and state. I have the $5 bill. I will mail it to you when you send that to me, because I can read you the amendment that prohibits the general government, the federal government, the government in Washington, D.C., from, and I quote, make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So I can find a prohibition against the general government, but I can find no prohibition against the states or the people. But I have $5 in my wallet for the first one that can cut and paste the article, section, or amendment that has a separation of church and state, and that it includes the states. Send it to me, and I'll send you the $5.
Yeah, that's a good challenge. And actually, we heard Pete Buttigieg, mayor of South Bend in my state, on the stage last night lecturing the American public about this, which of course he's absolutely wrong about. And you're right. And that leads to the last thing that I wanted to work in today. I know Suzanne had plans of maybe talking about this today, and I know she's getting close to having a piece up on this. I know, kind of following from a distance, she was brought into some conversation about a recent Supreme Court case ruling in the Blandensburg Cross case out in Maryland. You may have seen about this in the news. I know she, again, had picked up on it and had been into some dialogue on Facebook with some people related to this decision that was made here. I won't go into all the details related to it now. I don't want to certainly steal her thunder. But essentially, a cross had been erected in the state of Maryland in honor, I believe, of World War I veterans. I could be wrong by that. I haven't read through all of the details on the case. But it is a separation, again, as you said, of church and state issue there. And so she really does a fantastic job, and she's written a piece that she's going to share with you guys. I'm assuming she'll have it up on her website, SuzanneCSherman.com. You can check that out. She's got a whole bunch of great information up there. I think she's going to have it up there, and you may find it in other outlets that pick it up too. I briefly kind of skimmed through it. She sent it to me late last night. What she really goes about doing, and this is really fantastic pickup on her part, is talking about the idea of the incorporation doctrine, the 14th Amendment, and how the Bill of Rights have been applied to the states when it was never really intended to happen that way. That was against the general government, as you said there, Jeff, and really kind of breaking down the language. This is what's really important about an exercise in doing this. You said, which is really important there, Congress shall make no law. Right. So it oftentimes, as it is and comes down to, people just gloss over that. Right. Well, the courts have said, man, and well, it's been established, and this is precedent, and all these other, things that get thrown out. But when we do that, we completely lose track of the concepts and ideas of what are so valuable in there. And so, to go back through and look, as you just said, find it, look for it in the Constitution. Where does it say it? And you're not going to find it because it was a conversation that Jefferson had with the Danbury Baptist Church in talking about some things related to the general government and an establishment of religion. The other thing I believe that she's going to talk about here too is that the federal government has no authority to hear this case because it's not even on federal land, it's on state land. This is a state's issue. And so again, talking about incorporating through the 14th Amendment, the Bill of Rights to the states, and the damage that has done to our government and to the states. It's completely neutered the states in terms of their authority and autonomy as individual units that you have talked about before, Jeff, in this, what is supposed to be federal republic, this union of the states. And now it is, as we've said before, the one size fits all approach that everybody's going to conform to what DC wants. Come hell or high water, they don't care about the culture or the society of your state and region that you live in or community that you're a part of. You will conform to what the 9 lawyers cloaked in robes have to say about it. And that's all there is to say there. So again, she's going to pick that up, I'm sure, next week. And once she has that ready for publication again, I want to encourage you to check out Suzanne on Facebook. She's got her personal page, so long as she stays out of Facebook jail. She's got the Wasatch Report. She's got her website, Suzanne C. Sherman, the Cerberus Radio Network, just tons of great ways that you can connect. So, Jeff, I will turn it over to you to close us out.
All right. Well, that concludes another Waking Up Cerberus. We here at the Cerberus Radio Network appreciate all you that listened on Radio Co. Please keep going there. That's where we would love for you to go, as YouTube is making this much more difficult. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week with some more episodes.